I have very early memories of like waking up and hearing my parents fighting about money. And so I worked full-time in college, paid for my own education, took out loans, was working, skipping class to work lunch shifts to pay for my rent and all that kind of stuff.
How did that change over time?
Damn, dude, like that's like kind of what it takes to get out of the jungle,
Growing up hearing his parents argue about money, Demetri Themelis learned early that financial security doesn't come easy. With just faith, self-belief, and raw determination, he led Knock through 3 years without revenue, a journey that culminated in a pivotal moment holding their first $75 check. Now, after selling his company to RealPage, he's discovering there's more to life than drinking from one bucket of motivation, proving that sometimes the hardest part of getting what you want is figuring out what to do once you have it.
One of the more, if not the most emotionally charged moments of our entire entrepreneurial journey was opening our first check from our very first customer, $75, right? The feeling of like holding that check and being both incredibly excited because it was like this validation of everything that we'd been through. 3 years worth of problem solving, challenges, fundraising, like every problem, you name it.
As a founder, you have to balance many dichotomies. And I think it's so hard. Like, we're going to get this first dollar. Do you really have product market fit? Is there interest?
Holy crap. How?
Demetri, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Shiv.
Super excited to chat. I know we had this scheduled a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
And you were set to fly out to LA.
Yep.
And for some reason or another, your flight got canceled and it was a storm and all this stuff. And last week I texted you. I was like, I'm going to be in Dallas. Are you? And you're like, yeah. And I guess here we are.
It's nice how things work out.
I know.
Well, it didn't work out and now it's worked out.
No, it did.
Yeah.
I want to start hot.
Yeah. Let's go.
What is your earliest memory of ambition or of wanting to be different?
Wow. You did not prep me for that. Let's just go with the first thing that comes to my head. I mean, I didn't grow up in like a money secure household. And so, I have very early memories of like hearing my parents, fighting about like waking up and hearing my parents fighting about money and things like that. And so, I never wanted, this is maybe more just kind of like a money security type of thing, but like, kind of realizing like, I don't want to have those problems, so I want to work really hard and be able to have, some financial security in my life. And I think that, it's more of like a motivation, earliest memories of like a motivation of wanting to have financial security because it wasn't like, I think, some people are fortunate to have that example from their parents where they, like they're just kind of taught or see an example of their parents of being really responsible in that area of things. And if you don't have that, it's like a path you have to kind of figure out yourself, but you can certainly be, motivated. So
Yeah.
probably some kind of like, I think people are always motivated either by like they see an example of like something positive and they're like, I want to emulate behaviors to achieve like a particular outcome, or you're motivated by something that's kind of like negative and then you want to like do something different. And both I think are totally valid, and motivations that work. Mine in that particular case is probably like, I want to do something a little bit different.
It's actually really weird that you bring that up because that is exactly what motivated me in
Yeah.
the beginning.
Really?
I also grew up, yeah, exactly. I've literally said exactly what you said. I kind of have goosebumps. I didn't grow up wealthy. I grew up understanding that money was literally the root of all problems. All arguments in my house were about money, from buying too expensive of a car to not paying the mortgage to everything. I just associated all the fights that my parents had with financial insecurity. So when I kind of graduated, I imagine similar to you, what I associated with security and freedom and stability was all around like financial security.
Yeah. Have you ever read, you said like the money is the root of all problems or whatever, or how you said it. Have you ever read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged?
I've heard of the book, but I haven't read it.
It's kind of, I mean, it was written, many decades ago by like a famous Russian novelist, but you could Google or YouTube Francisco D'Anconia's money speech from Atlas Shrugged. It's like 17 minutes long, like a monologue on that very specific thing. And don't ask me to try to explain it because it's just so deep and beautiful and wonderful. But it makes like an awesome case for how the money is not the root of all problems.
That's awesome. I'll
Yeah.
I'll listen to it. I actually haven't heard of
I
it.
recommend anybody listen to that speech because it's incredible. But it's anyways, I'm not like intelligent enough to try to explain it,
We'll
but
put it in the
yeah,
show notes.
totally. Yeah.
Okay.
Please do. It's really, really cool and everybody should listen to it.
So, what did your parents do growing up work-wise?
My mom was a nurse at Children's Hospital for over 40 years. So she was, you know, she's a legendary nurse and can't even probably is taking care of thousands of sick kids and stuff like that. So she was, nurse, employee of a hospital. My dad was an entrepreneur, owned a chain of photo labs. So, like, when there was film and you took pictures, you'd drop off your film canisters, they would develop them. And, we all know how film went. So, that business died and they kind of rebirthed into like digital printing and things like that. But I learned a lot about kind of entrepreneurship from my dad's experience for sure.
When you say you learned a lot, was it through observation or was it through him actually sitting down with you and walking you through his business and other
No,
things?
more observation. I mean, their business was I mean, obviously it had to reinvent itself, like, after like, once digital photography completely erased the film photography industry, but, like, I don't know if your parents, had, like, their own business or anything, but spending a lot of time at the business, helping out, doing projects, working there as, like, a, child labor, uh, but, no, you just kind of observe things, and I think once I started going like, as I got a little older and started like, I took a business class in high school or something like that, and or a marketing class, and then you can start to bring some of your own independent experience to kind of, or lessons that you learn or books you read or whatever, and then you kinda have some context to evaluate kinda how maybe your parents or someone does things, and that started asking questions like, "Why don't we do this?" or "Why don't you do that?" Um
Do you have any siblings?
I do, yeah, I'm the oldest of 3. I've got a sister who's 2 years younger and then a brother 2 years younger than that.
Years younger than that. What paths have they gone on?
My sister, she, was a nurse also and worked as a volunteer firefighter for a while, so she did some really cool stuff, pretty badass, and then was like a first responder and all that, and then, got married, had a couple kids, and she's, an awesome, mom and great sister and family member. And then my brother is a pilot. He serves in the Air Force.
Was the family close growing up?
Yeah, definitely.
Did you guys eat dinner together?
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah, every
all
night.
day?
Yeah, definitely.
And you grew up where again?
Just outside in the suburbs of Seattle.
In the
Yeah.
suburbs of Seattle. Okay. I am a strong believer that a lot of our decisions and behaviors and actions are pre-programmed from the experiences and the set of genetics, experiences from 0 to 6 or 0 to 12,
Sure.
and the set of genetics that we're born with.
Yeah.
What experiences do you feel like from that age has made you who you are today?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think that how many people do you know with siblings who, I mean, like even my own experience, like siblings are so different and you have largely the same like external circumstances, like you're raised by the same parents or in the same household in the same neighborhood, go to the same schools, and then yet siblings, can take totally different paths or have totally different personalities. So probably more personally inclined to think it's like more nature than nurture that drives us. But on the nurture or kind of experience side of things, I think something that really stands out to me was I'm Greek and the like Greek Americans have a really strong, like tight knit community in the United States, or especially like within the Greek Orthodox Church and everything. And there's so many, like it's a very successful and like tight knit, like sub demographic. And so I think the way I was raised in that community, it was like there's, all these friends of my parents, like, I thought everybody was my uncle or my aunt. You called everybody Theo or Thea. And, it felt like a big family, and there was just a lot of role models, and so I feel like my parents, did a good job of, like, they were part of a community. We were raised as a part of a community where I had a lot of examples of, people who were, like, really involved in their, giving back in their communities, were really influential in the business world or in healthcare and law, all kinds of different professional pursuits. And so I just think that's like such a powerful, like a blessing and a privilege to have like a whole village of people that, have a good set of values and are trying to make the most of, what they have, and to be kind of surrounded by that was like something I don't think I really thought about at the time. But then, you reflect later on when you're asked a question like that, and you're like, yeah, that was really impactful to, who I am today was kind of the example that you saw as a kid. And, in my case, it was like a village and a really awesome village to kind of draw from different people's experience and examples and all that.
Yeah, it's funny. When I've often thought about like the question I asked you for me and like what's influenced me. And I think for me similarly, or actually differently, I didn't have like my family and I, we're all super close. I have two siblings as well. I'm the middle child. And I didn't like have any mentors or anything like my family, my dad did a little bit of real estate, worked in tech. My mom was a real estate agent. And in some ways, I was exposed to real estate heavily. But when I think about like mentorship for me, I feel like the internet
Mm,
played such a big role.
yeah.
Like when people ask me who was my mentor, it's like the internet, right? Because
How
like
old are you?
I'm 29 right
You're
now.
29. Okay. So we've got 10 years difference. So yeah, like I didn't have
Oh, you
the
didn't have
benefit of the internet. I mean, it was a little earlier.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like for me, like every time and maybe it's because I'm just like naturally curious. I've
Yep.
always been super, super
Sure.
curious. And like whenever I had a problem, I would go to Google or I
Right.
would go to YouTube.
Yeah.
I'd watch all these videos and I found it like
That's cool.
in college, in high school for the college admission essay or whatever. You remember you had to submit
Of
the
course. Yeah.
essay.
Yeah.
One of the questions was like, who was your hero?
Mm,
And I remember struggling with that because there was not one person that came to mind, and I
right.
think I've always been like that. Like, you take some things from some people, you take other things from other people,
Totally.
and
Yeah.
it's just an
Just
amalgamation
kind
of,
of
like,
mix it all up.
everything, like
See what works for you.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's interesting to hear. Did you feel like either, like, books or videos or any, like, media influenced you quite a bit, or was it just mainly people and
I mean, I read a lot growing up, and my mom's a really avid reader, and we read a lot in the house, but not a ton in that regard. I think I had an interesting experience with probably the first person that I'd consider like, once if we fast forward into, like, the entrepreneurial journey, you end up meeting a lot of people, whether they're, like, you just learn a lot, and you're surrounded by people who kinda act as informal mentors or in some cases, like, formal advisors and board members. But the first time in my life that I felt like I had, like, a formal mentor was, there's a guy, Paul Karros, who married my aunt, and, so, like, related through marriage, and I was in college, like, about to graduate from college, and I felt like up until that point, it was like a kind of a turning point in my life where I was about to graduate and had this sort of realization that's like, whoa, like there's no more track that you're on, right? Like you from it early on, you're kind of just doing whatever you're just being dragged along by your parents to whatever they're having you do. And then, there's school, like elementary school, middle school, high school. In my case, my parents were always really adamant about going to college. So that felt like not like a decision. It was sort of like you need to go to college. But then as you approach the end of that experience, you're kind of at this point where like, okay, like the track is over and then you kind of have to start walking and you can kind of go whatever direction you want to go. And up until that point, I hadn't really had any formal mentorship of anybody kind of saying like, here's how you could start a career in this, or here's how you start it, here's how you kind of take those first steps afterwards. It was always just get a college degree. That was kind of the last stop on the line. And so, sorry, this is kind of a long story.
no,
But
no, no, go for
I'll
it.
get to I'm long-winded. Struggling. It was 2008. Like the economy was falling apart. Like nobody was getting job offers. I was getting really nervous about entering the workforce. And I was kind of reintroduced to Paul. He had a really successful career in finance and was spending a lot of time doing like counseling and professional coaching and things like that. And he was, interested in doing it for young adults and stuff like that. So we were kind of reintroduced in that context. And I went through like a sort of my first ever coaching thing with him, and his whole deal was, and I think this will kind of tie back to like experiences stuff because I'm really passionate about that and that interplay between kind of like who you are and then the experiences and how they kind of tangle together to make you who you are. But in any case, in his exercise, we went through each period of time, like elementary school, middle school, high school, your first job, college, and for each period of time, had me go through and list like 3 to 5 activities of things that I either really enjoyed doing or was really good at. Could be anything, like there were no rules. It was just write those things down. And then it was like, okay, step 2, for each of those 3 to 5 things, answer a few questions. Like, how did you find yourself doing it? What specific things, like name 3 to 5 specific things about that activity that you particularly enjoyed or were particularly good at. Um, who were you doing them with, etc. Handful of other questions. And like, sounds really simple, but all of a sudden you take like 5 periods of life, 3 to 5 things, and then 3 to 5 things on that. And it turns into this like 6-hour writing exercise where you're kind of creating this document of all these things that you enjoy. And I felt a little nerdy because I'm like, man, here I'm graduating with a finance degree and I'm answering questions like, I enjoyed building forts with my friends, or, out of driftwood at the beach, or stuff like that. Or like, I really like flying kites. I really liked planning. I was really good at planning parties in college. I'm like, how is this all going to connect? Right. And it was crazy because by the end of it, and when we sat down and talked about it, there was like all these themes that just kept popping up over and over again. Right. Like, as an example, like one of mine was kind of like I really enjoy getting the lay of the land. Then I get bored really quickly and I want to kind of on to the next thing, like kind of an explorer, frontier type mentality or theme that kept popping up. Like I always enjoyed being on a frontier as opposed to not on a frontier. And I'd never connected the dots between, things that I was doing as a kid, like building a fort in the woods, you know, hiking a little deeper into the wood and building another fort, and then things that you do in high school or in college, or your role on a team, etc. And then all of a sudden, you started connecting all these dots, and it's like this theme emerges, like, oh, like you really enjoy being or like perform better in a frontier. Man, that might help you shape what direction you want to take once you leave college, right? And so to wrap up kind of the long story, so you asked the question about like mentorship, it was advisors or mentors, stuff like that. It was like I really got my first experience in that right when I graduated college. And it was like came at a perfect time in my life because it helped me kind of piece together that big messy puzzle of life experience up until that point. And it was like the first time in my life where I was like, okay, like I know who I am. I know what kind of questions I need to ask employers when they ask you, when they start asking you questions. I know how to answer them. I know what I'm looking for. I know what kind of environment I'm going to need in order to be successful. And it was super empowering. So I encourage anybody to find a great mentor, early on, or help. There's many ways to skin that cat, but like I'm so passionate about that and just think that's like, it can change it changed my life. I think it can change anybody's life.
That's such a cool story and such a good framework. So you went through this exercise after graduating college, but
It was like right around that, right around graduation.
before starting a job.
Hmm.
So, actually, one point I'll say on the mentorship thing.
I couldn't get a job out of school. Like I didn't have the best GPA. The economy, it was 2008. I graduated with a finance degree, like worst possible time to graduate with a finance degree. And after I went through that coaching, my very next interview that I had, I ended up getting that job because and I do kind of attribute being able to get a job in the domain that I'd gotten my degree at a time where those jobs were not easy to get, in a large part was, I think, due to that, that workshop and that conversation. So, I mean, for me, it was like very tangible how it like changed my life, but I think, it's great work for anybody to embark on. at any
So,
point in time.
so then, okay, so you got the job at UBS, and up until this point, what it sounds to me like is there was no picture of like entrepreneurship, founder, like, many founder, and I don't think this is like one size fits all correct prescription, but
Totally, yeah.
like you don't have to be the kid like selling candy or selling DVDs in like fifth grade to
Yeah.
like then become an entrepreneur.
No, no.
Similar for me is like I kind of fell into this. I didn't like plan to be an entrepreneur or founder or anything like that. For you, was it the same thing? Like, did you ever think about becoming a founder or starting your own thing? And
I always, yeah, I mean, like ideation was really kind of like a big theme for me, that popped up and, kind of going through those exercises. And then even later on, if you do like different, strengths finding type of stuff, like ideation was always big for me. And so I always had a lot of ideas, that were entrepreneurial, never really like was there, more for fun or ways you could make money, kind of like little side hustles in high school and things like that. But, graduating, no. I mean, I think at that point in time, I was still pretty stuck in a mentality of, like, Greek families, it's like, be a doctor, be a lawyer, go into business or, do some kind of professional, like, career, that's kinda like what Greek parents are, like, want of their children, and so, I didn't like chemistry. That ruled out being a doctor, law, so that ruled that out, and I remember just taking like entry level econ class, but like, oh, this business stuff is super interesting. That kind of led me towards a finance degree. But at that point, I thought, well, if you're going to work in finance, you should go be an investment banker. That just sounded like fancy and it sounded like the kind of doctor equivalent, in that domain. And so, you know, that's the path I pursued. Um, what I found out was that I wasn't very good at it, and that I didn't particularly like it.
what weren't you good at specifically? Just like looking at
I mean, I'm not
spreadsheets?
I'm not particularly analytical in general. I'm not great at execution. I'm like more like stronger with ideas execution. And so, if you're in a job that requires a lot of analytical work and a lot of like project execution, well, like you're just going to inevitably fail. And I don't want to say like fail, like, but you'll learn that that's not the sort of environment that's going to bear the most fruit for you. Um, and I think that people figure that out over the course of their life. Like nature will and experience will, everybody will learn that lesson. But I think I needed to kind of learn that, all right, like I don't need to have a, like in my case, like, I'd already ruled out like medicine or law or something like that. Like I don't need to be a banker in order to be successful. And actually, if I try to do that, I'm going to be unsuccessful because it's just not like the climate in which, my like tree will grow, Um, my journey to entrepreneur, I think then later on there were just more like immediate motivations. Like I'm living in New York City. I'm spending more than I make on rent and living in the city. And finance, was still like getting out of the Great Recession. And the quick story is like all my friends that had from the West Coast that had stayed working for technology companies, Amazon, Uber, Pinterest, Microsoft, they just were having more fun and, like, making, a good wage and had cool benefits and seemed, like stock options and benefits and things like that. And, the other not co-founder and I thought to ourselves, like, we'd met at UBS and we're like, "We should go try this technology thing. Like, let's how hard could it be?" And that was kinda like, we figured out we can do these other professions and we can, we'll make enough headway to put a roof over our heads or whatever, feed ourselves, but can we go do more? And that was kind of the motivation.
So he and you both kind of connected on this fact, like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Those
we both
lines.
worked in finance, but, like, I mean, I think we have 10 years between us, like, it was a really dark time, like, you know, people were killing themselves, jumping out of buildings and in finance. I mean, stuff was like the institutions were crumbling and people were like it was crazy. And every single kind of senior person or people who had been working in that industry for 20 years is like just every day, like this isn't what it used to be. It's never going to be the same, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. It's like a really demoralizing environment to be kind of young and energetic and wanting to, hoping that like the place where you wanted to invest your time and grow professionally, it's like you're just kind of swimming against the tide, right? And so, um, it was a bad deal. So he and I, we met there, we were always talking about like, how could we escape, how can we escape this? Or like, what would we do? So we would always share ideas. I don't think we ever really took it particularly seriously until, 5 or 6 years into that career when and things started to get a little bit more normal. And then it was like, okay, well, like, we don't like the world's not going to end anymore. And we've sort of proven we can like swim in these waters. But is there more out there? And like, should we actually take some of these like ideas we had or notions of entrepreneurship seriously?
Where was your level of self-belief at, like, while at the end of your UBS journey and when you were embarking on starting something new?
I would say pretty high by then. Like I wouldn't have been ready, 1 or 2 years in, but to that time. But like 5, 6 years in, like again, after we'd kind of come out of the worst of the recession and like, I'd gotten promoted a couple times, found a way to do okay with kind of what I was bringing to the table. I think, yeah, then I had some self-confidence. I mean, one interesting thing was I was an equity sales trader. So what does that mean? Like a big bank like UBS, which is like a global bank, they have, they employ hundreds of research analysts that, do research and analysis on every, thousands of companies in different sectors and all that kind of stuff. And they produce literally like 100,000 pieces of research, like reports on every subject you could possibly imagine, like senior care or oil and gas or toy, this year's toys for Christmas. Um, and so they're just constantly producing research and opinions on sectors and industries or companies, the investment themes. And so what the sales traders do is they're just constantly every morning go in, different group of analysts comes up, they're sharing kind of a summary of what here's the, report I just produced, here's the bullet points. We'd pour through that research. We'd try to take the best ideas that we'd have, and then we'd call clients and be like, "Hey, we think you should consider selling Starbucks and buying Tim Horton because of, A, B, C, D, E reasons." And so we'd be kind of sharing stock ideas, equity ideas. And so people would sometimes it was proactive, sometimes you just answering the calls and someone says, "Hey, my customer has a bunch of Starbucks stock. What do we think about that?" "Well, we think it's a little overbought. We think you should sell it, but we think there's a lot of value in Tim Hortons and it's still a, consumer discretionary and blah, blah, blah." I remember when someone asked a question and like I remember telling them, I can't remember what the particular like stock idea was, but like the next thing I know, like they send in a trade for like $3 million to, they sold the stock of the company I told them to sell and then bought the other one that I told them to buy. Now, that was like terrifying for me, right? I really remember being kind of terrified, like, holy crap, someone just made an investment decision based on what I told them with an amount of money that was it's a lot of money. And honestly, it was like I couldn't believe it myself. Yeah, there was like a self-confidence issue there. And then, over time you do it more and more and you realize you're like, whoa, like I might be 23 years old, but I'm waking up at 5 a.m. I'm going to the sales meeting. I'm talking to the analysts who are, the absolute experts in their field that are producing an expert opinion on this. You're not going to get it right all the time, but you're absolutely like you are the best source of information to help make that for somebody to make that important decision for themselves. When you notched a few wins and things like that, it's like hugely confidence boosting. So it's funny when you ask the question of like, what was your self confidence when you started the business? I remember telling Tom, my co-founder, like obviously a necessary step in entrepreneurship is raising capital to start your business. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to be able to raise this millions of dollars, just a few phone calls, not going to be a problem because I was so used to pitching, ideas by then and having people make trades. And like those were short phone conversations about a stock, this stock idea or that stock idea. And I thought, well, if I'm quitting my job, I'm starting a business with you, and we are like fully committed to an idea and we have like tons of belief and passion about a particular, you know, product, right? Like it's going to be so easy to sell the idea of buying stock in that company. And I was so wrong about that. Like I couldn't have been more wrong about that. And the big lesson that I think I learned was I don't think people like when they're starting companies realize how much value there is in like institutional credibility. So like although I was the person telling someone to say sell Starbucks or buy Tim Hortons or vice versa, I was just like an employee of a giant global investment bank with 400 years of experience and like a a logo that everybody recognizes and understands. It's like Goldman Sachs or whatever, right? Like you're just speaking, but all the credibility isn't the 23-year-old. It's everything behind you. And I think that can kind of get to your head a little bit as like a younger person. I didn't I guess I just didn't appreciate like how much power there was behind that institutional credibility. So then I left and I'd call all those same brokers and clients, people I'd developed relationships with, and I'm like, "Hey, I've got the best idea I've ever had, and I really want you to invest like a paltry amount of money relative to what I'm telling you on a day to day into this little idea. And I really believe in this one." And, it's like, "Sorry, who are you? What's this about?" And so, yeah, man, confidence is great, but, then you get punched in the face.
I love that. That is so true actually. And like when you're making that transition and you have no institution or establishment to lean on, it's just Demetri, it's just Tom, and you
Sure.
got to figure it out and
Yep.
build that reputation one step at a time.
And like, very iconic figures in tech and business, like Steve Jobs and Bezos, right? Steve Jobs famous for saying, kind of the formula for an entrepreneur is like stay hungry, stay foolish, right? And like hunger, I think, is like a necessary ingredient to having a successful, building a successful business. And I do think being foolish is also a necessary ingredient for a successful outcome. Like if you know everything, if you know how hard it's going to be, then you might just never start in the first place. So you kind of have to have an element of naivety, right? And then just the other guy, Bezos, right? And I think he was just on a podcast or an interview the other day saying that the hardest thing he ever did with Amazon was like raising his first couple $1,000,000 of seed investors. And he talked about the 60 meetings that he had and how 40 of them told him no. And I was laughing because I'm like, yep, I think we met with about 60 people and about 40 or 50 told us no too. And that was, you know, not maybe not the hardest, but like, one of the hardest things. And you've gone through that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
definitely.
I love that. The stay foolish thing. I think like it's interesting. I think in order to be foolish, like foolishness to me is like risk. It's trusting yourself. It's breaking convention. It's thinking different. And I think in order to do that and in order to be foolish, you need to actually trust yourself and trust your intuition. Because if you look at data, right, like you can make decisions via data or intuition.
Right.
When you look at data and data gives you an answer, that's not foolish, right? Like
Mm,
that's actually logical. You're looking at
yeah.
data and you're informing your next move through like numbers and through statistics. I think when you trust your intuition, that's when it can be questioned as foolish or
Sure.
foolishness. And for me, at least, the way I think about being foolish, the way you actually create step function changes in your business is doing things that are foolish, right? Like even not to say this podcast is a step function change, but like there are many podcasts that like focus on ideas and innovations and knowledge. And there's no data that said like, oh, let's start a podcast that like
Right.
talks about personal stories. And it's just more of my intuition and the
Yeah.
relationships I get to build and the
Yeah.
people I get to meet and all of that accumulating to something,
Yeah.
not knowing exactly what that is, but trusting that
Yeah.
that's going to be
Well, there's like I don't know who said it, but there's a quote that's like all progress, is dependent on the unreasonable man, right? Like if nobody was foolish, then we'd never have any step function change in society, history, etc. So yeah, I mean, I I feel like having lived it, I think agree with Steve Jobs. agree with whoever said that quote, agree with you, a little bit of foolishness. And again, you have to be maybe careful how you define foolishness, but taking a leap of faith with, some degree of self-confidence, even though you don't have all the data, um, or any, you know, you just kind of have to rob that piggy bank of self-confidence and take that jump, and see what happens, right?
There's so much I want to talk to you about how you
Yeah,
came up with the
for
idea and
sure.
all
Yeah.
that stuff. The one thing I want to talk to you about though, and I don't want to get too off topic, is the second part of that, which is like staying hungry, right?
Mhm.
Like obviously, you've taken knock to a successful exit. You've made, hopefully money to retire and be comfortable. Um, how do you think about instilling, this is something I think about a lot, is how do you think about instilling hunger in the generations to come, your kids, their kids, etc.?
I had this exact same conversation with one of our investors recently who reached out very humblingly, like asking for advice on his business now. This is a guy who's taken 2 companies through IPOs. So this guy does not need to work, and now he's grinding it out as like the CEO of, his whatever nth enterprise. And I think he's one of the smartest, kind of founders and leaders that I know. Like, I drink the Kool-Aid when this guy offers it to me. And I actually asked him the same question. I was like, "John, you know, you've taken 2 companies public. You're grinding it out, at the trade shows, on the road, doing the road shows, calling me about, asking for, if I know anybody for this kind of role or whatever, just like doing all the things you need to do." I'm like, "How do you do that?" And I think the answer is like for somebody that's been through it, um it's more of a like, he said this and it resonated with me, which was like, there's a curiosity of, "Can I do it again, but can I do it better without the mistakes that I made the first time?" Like, is what I learned worth a damn? Can I leverage what I know now to to have a repeat successful outcome, without the, maybe some of the pain, you experienced the first time by making all the mistakes, of which we made all of them, and survived, thank God. But, like, I think that really resonates with me, like, there's a deep hunger, at some point in my life to maybe explore entrepreneurship again because I really wanna know if what I learned the first time around, like, will that could we achieve, the same or greater outcome, faster, more efficiently, etcetera, um, without the mistakes along the way. And, that's probably enough there's probably enough, like, foolishness and self-confidence there to, like, think you can, to maybe nudge that to happen someday. Um, but for someone that hasn't been through it, like, I don't not necessarily they need to be younger, it could be any stage in their life that they wanna take that jump into entrepreneurship or, like, you asked the question, like, how do you instill that kinda hunger in somebody else? That, I don't know yet. I mean, I think that, like, their circumstances, will determine that. I did feel really weird, like, when we sold the company, uh, my wife was pregnant, we had our first, and I remember, our financial advisor, recommending that we open up like a 529, like a college savings plan for her. She's, at the time, 6 months old. And so I remember putting in basically enough money in that account to, like, probably, in 20 years, hopefully grow enough to pay for her education. And, like, I worked full time in college, paid for my own education, took out loans, was working, skipping class to work lunch shifts to pay for my rent and all that kind of stuff. That was not my experience. And so I remember like sitting in my driveway opening the mail and they send you this little certificate and it was like, congratulations, like you funded your, like it's sort of a silly certificate that you could like give to a kid, to kind of say like, here's a gift for your education, like a grandparent or parent might do for a grandchild or something like that. And I remember thinking to myself, like, holy crap, like, my little girl like has no idea how lucky she is to have this kind of gift. I kept thinking to myself, like, how will I ever, make sure that she understands and appreciates that, or her circumstances will be different than mine. How do I make sure that there's hunger? Because I think it's such a necessary ingredient to, be successful. And so have to find a way to create, conditions. But, everybody's different and, you can't live in somebody else's shoes and you just kind of do the best you can.
Yeah, and I think the right answer is like you said, it's every kid is also going to be different,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
Like
She
sitting
might
here
be like,
having no
what are you
kids,
talking about? Yeah.
nothing, no wife, no
Yeah.
kids. But I think it's true. Is like
your first kid versus your second, like the tactics or the methods in which you try to like instill hunger is probably going to be different.
Yeah.
So there's not like one prescription, but it's something
Yeah.
that I think about just because like I've seen so many people. I moved to India when I was 12. And I ended up going to, my dad got offered the opportunity to join an early stage startup. Didn't work out, but from 12 to 18, I went to an international school in India. And because it was an international school, a lot of the kids were super wealthy. The kids that were from India that were going to an international school simply meant that like your parents had like too much money and like,
Interesting.
because there's no reason for you to go to international school
Okay.
from India,
Yeah.
because the whole point of an international school is to help kids from other countries assimilate into
The culture.
Right.
Yeah.
So I grew up with a lot of super wealthy friends.
Yeah.
And it was just so evident to me, similar to you, that of course there's good things about everybody and there's not great things about everybody. But I feel like I've learned a lot in my life from experiences or people of things not to do. And I think
That's what we were saying earlier. Like, you're either motivated because, like, hey, I want to be like Mike, or I don't want to be like Mike.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
think my experience in life has
Yeah.
been the negative
Sure.
experiences have
Yeah.
been more impactful.
Yeah.
And it's just such a hard thing. And I don't blame them, right? Like I grew up knowing that like money or seeing money cause so many problems.
Yeah.
That like I was driven. I had a fire in my belly the same way you did.
Yep.
But when you don't have that drive because you're overtly comfortable, like how do you instill that? And like that's always my fear is, hopefully, I experience success in my life and I continue to build things and that produces value in the world and returns money. But how do I ensure that like my kid is not spoiled and doesn't have that drive? And it's like a really tricky thing because even the smartest people in the world,
Mm-hmm.
the hardest working people in the world haven't solved that problem.
Yeah.
There's many examples of very wealthy people that don't think ahead or don't know how to solve it, and it ends up like hurting the kid.
Totally. And like, I remember one of the more, if not the most kind of emotionally charged moments of our entire entrepreneurial journey was opening our first check from our very first customer, March of 2016, Connecticut Realty Trust, $75, right? It's like a lot of customers in the multifamily industry pay their bills with checks. So open this check, holding this little piece of paper for $75. That was March of 2016. We quit our jobs in June of 2013. So we're talking almost a full 3 years later without any income from, or any revenue, which is like like a tremendous validation that whatever you're building actually works. And I'll never forget like the feeling of like holding that check and being both incredibly excited because it was like this validation of everything that we'd been through, like 3 years worth of problem solving, challenges, fundraising, like every problem, you name it. Also like terrified, being like, holy crap, how on earth, like we need so many more of these checks, right? Like it,
So fun.
like we've already spent, whatever, like, oh my God, like it was like the coolest thing, but also the most terrifying thing at the same time. But I would tell that story to like everybody that we hired on kind of like their day one orientation because I wanted, and I'd spend a lot of time talking about the 3 years before that kind of milestone. So I was like, how can I make like it was like this feeling of like learning the value of a buck. Like you kind of hear that like learn the value of a dollar or whatever. What's that mean? And for me, it was like 3 years of grinding it out and having to go run on nothing but, like, faith and self-confidence because you have there was no paycheck, from a or not even paycheck, like, revenue from a customer validating your idea. And even when people tell you, "Oh, great idea, cool, keep going," or "Great idea, like, we'll pilot it." But it's like, until they actually pay you for the thing that you're working on, it really doesn't mean anything. And I feel like, that holding that check was like later. I mean, I used to say this before I had a kid, but like now I actually can say it from experience. It was like this crazy cool feeling where you're like, when you get it, your wife or the doctor like hands you your baby and you're like, "Oh my God, like I just met you and I love you so much." And then, but like when you open that check from your customer, like it's almost like you realize like how precious. I'm not talking about the money. I'm talking about what it the trust that it symbolizes from your customer and all the work that you put in. Like you have this like vision of how hard you worked for that check. And it's like, holy crap, like my customers are absolutely like they're like my baby, like they're precious to me. And I have to do everything in my power to like take care of them and listen to them and help them grow. Um and it's like I still say that was like probably one of the most like emotionally charged moments of the whole journey. I would really try my best to like explain that to new people coming into the company because I'm like, hey, now we might be doing, $1 million a month or $2 million a month in bookings, but it's like, don't you understand that like every single dollar is custom, like what it represents? It represents trust. It represents like life force that went into making this product, what it is today from so many different people. And like, do not mess up that, like, take that responsibility seriously. Like, do not screw that up because I think unless you've gone through that journey, I'd be very curious to know, like, if you had a moment like that. But yeah, for me, it was like huge.
I think every founder that gets past that first phase has that moment, and it's interesting. I was going to ask you, but I think I know the answer. The emotional charge of that experience versus selling your company. I imagine the former was just so much stronger, right? Like getting that first check. Maybe not, but I think for us, very similarly, I had that experience. I remember we pivoted to a different business. I'll save that story, but in the previous version of the business, I remember like seeing the like number of the receiving of the payment
Mm.
on the screen
Yeah.
and like immediately running down to Kendrick, my co-founder, like opening the door and being like, dude, did you see that?
Yeah.
And it was like some measly amount. And it's just like
Yeah.
such a
But it's what it
gratifying moment.
represents. Like, it's not even about the amount. It's just like everything that all the risk you took, all the risk people that believed in you took by investing in you, or people that joined your company to help make that happen, like your whole team. Like, it's all, represented in that, you know, like that first check. And like for me, it's like every single time like a customer paid a bill, it was just this reminder of like what goes into that and how precious the customer is.
What was I mean, like, I think a lot of people also don't understand, and you don't blame them, but to be in the idea maze for 3 years, navigating, testing,
The jungle, yeah.
the jungle is like brutal. I mean, it's a brutal phase, right?
Yeah.
Because, like you're saying, when everything culminates into you getting money and getting that gratification, it's different. But everything before that is tough.
Oh, for sure.
What was that like? I mean, going through that for 3 years and figuring it out, testing things, like, what was that like?
Yeah. I mean, I think like the product market fit jungle, right? Like getting that first dollars. Um, it's without a doubt like the most interesting one of the I don't know the most, but like it is such like a specific and interesting phase in the life cycle of a business. Um, and I think it's like also the purest in a lot of ways because from the moment that you get that first check, right? You let's say you send an update to all your investors, say, hey, we've hit this, amazing milestone. Like we have people paying for our product now. Like that indicates product market fit, right? And you don't know if you've tapped a giant reservoir, of oil or if that's just, some little drop and that's all it's ever going to be. But the moment that you kind of tap oil or whatever analogy you want to use. All those investors, after that, it's like, forget the past. How much money are you going to get next month? How much are what does that mean for the quarter? What's that mean for the year? Um, and it changes everything. Like it just absolutely changes everything. Whereas when you're in pre-revenue product market fit, the jungle, it's like this almost like altruistic, period of time for a company or for founders, early employees, where you're like sole mission. It's not even about making money. It's like purely about like product market fit and validation. And you know, I think that like most products, do. I haven't like really thought about this before, but I'd be willing to bet that like most of the magic that like a particular company has, it's like they figure that out during their like initial product market fit, and then everything else is incremental from there. But that first time is like when things really kind of go, 0 to 1 for you. Yeah, it's like your question, like, what's it like, dude? 3 years of insanity trying to figure that out.
I bring that up just because I want people to understand that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I understand it because I know, and like, customers see you, they see knock,
Yeah.
and like maybe some of the early ones understand, but
Mm.
like it's tough. I mean, it's really tough, and 3 years is a long time. And for us, like, I remember Kendrick and I literally decided we were like, we're gonna move to a different city. We left our city and we are like, we're not leaving the city
Mhm.
till we get our first
Yeah.
dollar.
Yeah.
So we literally abandoned society,
I like
abandoned our
it, yeah.
friends, and we're like, we're
It's
going
like
all in.
the Napoleon like burning the
Burning the boats, like just
boats
going
or
all
whatever.
in,
Yeah.
like cutting out all ties. And like oftentimes that's what it took, right? Like it
I
was
think
just
it's
me.
hugely important, or like it's a wonderful tailwind, maybe not necessary, but like I think so.
Yeah, because there's so much going against you. I think
Yeah.
people don't understand that. Like there's so much I didn't know, you didn't know anything about multifamily. I didn't know anything about multifamily. I'm just like this
Yeah.
kid with no background, no experience in tech, no money, like calling
Yeah.
people, not knowing anything and trying to sell that, because the challenge is like you as a founder, you have to balance many dichotomies, right? Like one dichotomy is you have to have unconditional, relentless self-belief, but at the same time, you have to like be like stoked in reality, and you have to understand like reality.
Yeah.
And I think it's so hard. Like while I'm like, we're gonna get this first dollar,
Yeah.
but understanding like, do you really have product market fit? Is there
Well,
interest?
yeah, I mean, like that whole process of finding product market fit is also a deeply personal journey because it is like it's debasing in some ways. It's very ego eroding because whatever, I don't care, like name the company, like that wherever they start is usually what product market fit looks a lot different than their initial idea. Certainly was for us. Like, how we would have described what knock was from the time that we got, our first paycheck from our customer compared to what we maybe told friends and family or early investors on day one a few years earlier. Those two things were very, very different. And so you have all that self-belief, you have like this confidence in your idea or this belief that like something that the market doesn't, or that you can do something better. But until a customer agrees with you and you know the form of that is that subscription or whatever, that revenue that comes in, until that happens, it's like this clash of like, or a river and an ocean meeting or whatever. And um the customer is always right. But there's also like, you wouldn't have a business if you didn't change their mind and help, they have to do something differently than they did before. So you're kind of both right at the same time. And it's this really interesting dance. Like, I remember when we started, we were like, we just wanted to be a scheduling platform. Like, that's what we wanted to be kind of open table for the multifamily industry. We said, how come I can book a dinner reservation online with, I can see what's available. I know exactly what tables available, at what time, at what restaurant, and I can go online and with a click of a button, that particular restaurant knows who's coming. I know what time I'm coming and how many are in my party. And it's like the transaction is kind of, initiated with one click. We thought, man, living in New York or Seattle or San Francisco, all these places that we'd lived, was never like that looking for an apartment. Thought, why can't we just have open table for that? And so we just wanted to build a scheduling tool. But we didn't know anything about multifamily, and we didn't realize that, there was so much more to the transaction from the perspective of a leasing team than just scheduling the appointment. There's like all this engagement happening before the appointment. There's all this engagement and sales happening after the appointment in order to get to like an application, let's just say. And all that stuff was happening in these other communication channels. So our customers were pretty stoked initially on the idea of how do we, can we help you improve search traffic to foot traffic 24/7 a day with online scheduling? Easy value prop to understand and think like, yeah, I get a lot of leads and I'd love for those things to convert, overnight for me and come in and have, you know, a bunch of booked appointments with qualified renters ready to go. But there's so much other engagement that happens, and the industry has evolved a lot since then. Obviously, you guys are right in the middle of all that too. And like, at the time, almost 10 years ago now, like we learned we had to start bringing in these other communication channels in order to make it happen. But like we had built what we wanted to build and people were excited to try it, but they were not ready to pay for it. And I remember they just kept asking for all these other features, all these other features. I remember coming in and I can name the customer because I love them, but like Nolan Residential in Houston, Amy Siebert and Ashley, they sent us a list of like 63 feature requests. We'd been working with them on a pilot for months, like 63 bullet points of things they needed. And I remember going to Tom and being like, hey, Tom, like if these guys are going to convert their pilot into being a paid customer, here's the list of demands. And, he had like a freak out where he's like 60, like there's 63 features that you want me to build and develop with our engineers, 63 features to get one customer. It's like, I don't know if this whole journey is going to be worth it. If it's going to take 63 custom feature requests in order to be able to bill one customer, will we ever have a business? And I was like, I don't know what to tell you, man. I actually don't know the answer to your question, but my gut says that like, yeah, it like maybe it's not going to be like that for every customer, but like this is a customer. They're here, they're at the table, and they're telling us what it's going to take to do. And we should probably just listen to the customer because like their opinion matters more than ours on whatever it might be. And he just said, okay, F it, I'll do it. And, had a good trust there, like basically punched them all out, and turned him into an awesome customer. Thank God, we didn't have to build 63 custom features for every customer because like they share, customers share needs. But damn, dude, like that's like kind of what it takes to get out of the jungle,
No, I remember like some of our early employees being like horrified, basically being like, is this just going to be like a consulting company because
Yeah.
you're like out here building this for this company, this for that
Right.
company? And like the reality is like you kind of like you have to, right? Like
Right.
the way you survive is like you just have to like take what you can get and like do whatever you
Oh,
can
yeah.
to deliver as much value and use that to like unlock
Yeah.
more opportunity.
What did you learn? Can you, exactly.
Yeah, and at some point, like you figure out a way to like package it into
Right.
something that is like sellable universally. But in the beginning, like you're not like beggars can't be choosers. I mean,
Right.
you're like, especially if you're breaking in the way we did.
And that's what I'm saying. Like that product market fit period is like this super pure period of time where it's all about satisfying the customer and like getting to validation. Afterwards, you get revenue. Now you have like this whole new set of problems. Like, how do I get
Yeah.
more quickly? How do I
So let's talk
implement
about
more
that. Like,
quickly?
at what point did you hit like
Fundamentally
escape
different
velocity?
stage. Yeah.
Yeah, at what point did you like hit escape velocity with the company? Like, what was the scaling stage like?
I don't know that you ever feel like you've hit escape velocity. You know what I mean? Because like you just have new sets of problems that are always on your plate. And honestly, like the new problems are big problems, or if anything, you just don't have as much time to deal with problems. So you're having to kind of let go of things that might have been like like a day ender type of problem or a month ender kind of problem, a year or two ago. Now are like things that you don't even have the bandwidth to address. You have to trust your team will figure it out. So I don't know that I ever like felt like we'd hit, escape velocity. Even going through an exit, like, deals aren't done until they're done. And so it's kind of like maybe the answer to your question is like, once everything was signed with the acquisition, okay, like we crossed some obvious threshold, but
Was there a feeling though that like at some point you were like, okay, like we have a good product, now we just need to like scale it? Was there
yeah,
that feeling?
definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
I think technically I felt like it was once we nailed all the different communication channels, because, and at that time we were telling customers, hi, Knock is a scheduling and communication platform for property managers and renters. Could you imagine the mouthful that like it is? Like, what is Knock? What is Zuma? Dude, it's like better tighten that up a little bit. And then eventually it was like, oh, we're CRM. Okay. Most people didn't even know what that meant, but at least it was like a one word answer of like what it is you do. And I feel like just the evolution that a product has to get in order to simplify the answer of what it is you do. To me, that's an indicator that you're scaling because you're not figuring out, like there's not so many words needed to describe what it is you do. Once you figure that out and once you can answer that question really succinctly, accurately, and once that doesn't change like every 2 days, I feel like that's probably like the best indicator of like, okay, your company is now in scale mode than it is like you're putting more energy towards scaling than you are product market fitting. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Question on like your skill sets. I know you mentioned that like in UBS you know you tend to spike more on being somebody who comes up with ideas and kind of trust your intuition, etc. Like, how did that change over time, if at all? And like, what was the difference between you and Tom?
I don't think things change over time. I think that like you learn to I think like leadership is all about energy management. And I think with experience, you can get better about realizing like if I'm putting energy, like you only have so much energy in a day, but if you're putting energy towards something that you suck at, it's a really bad use of time. So you need to start delegating things that you suck at to really smart people who are different than you and are really good at those things naturally, right? So I don't think things necessarily changed for me. Like I didn't like learn new skills. Well, definitely learn new skills, had experience or whatever, but just became a little sharper and a little quicker to recognize when something was not something that I'm gonna be good at, and I'm gonna, you know, find a way to delegate that to somebody else, build a team that has a diverse set of strengths to be able to tackle whatever kind of problems coming down the pike.
So, what were
Um,
you good at and what were you bad at?
so yeah, I mean, and that's like answers your other question about how Tom and I were different, but like Tom was the perfect co-founder for me, and I would like to think he would say the same thing about me to him because in the Venn diagram of strengths that two people could have coming to the table, like we had a very different set of strengths. Like there was overlap, but like very very little. And in the end, you kind of look back and you go, man, like the only time that we ever argue about stuff, it was always over that like small overlapping area of the Venn diagram. The rest of the stuff, super easy to be like, yeah, that's a Tom thing or that's a Demetri thing. And so for me, in at least in the business, it manifested in like kind of owning things like marketing and sales and customer success and like more like customer people oriented functions of the business because that was a lot of my experience was in sales and in customer service roles. Like worked in restaurants my whole life. So, that's how I was kind of wired. Whereas, Tom was like hyper attention to detail, like crazy perfectionist when it came to product quality, super interested in problem solving, um, like, had like a tremendous amount of stamina and patience to like stay with a problem until it was cracked. Um, and very analytical. And so, it was much easier for him to work on building products and working with, engineering and technical side of the business, than it was for me. So, I mean, it was really kind of, we're naturally like a good fit. And, without, I think if I were to ever start another company, I would spend so much time with whoever I was thinking about working with, being very intentional about making sure that those things work. I think we were kind of lucky that it was a good fit right out of the gate. And a lot of people don't have that experience with, co-founders and, you know, there's a billion stories of that out there for sure.
Knock was sold in 2022.
2022, yeah.
2022,
Mhm.
November? It was like
October
October
2022, yeah.
2022. So now we're a little over 2 years in.
Yep.
What surprised you on the upside and downside 2 years later?
Yeah. On the upside, where I'm, like, blown away at the scale that our, business has achieved now as part of, uh, like, RealPage. They're, a huge company that has, a massive install base, and so bringing, you know I mentioned earlier, like, the power of institutional credibility and, like, as, an independent new entrant into our space, you really have to go, like, create that credibility, and, like, you and I both know that there are, a lot of customers out there that just, like there's a whole spectrum of, like, how much trust they need to have of, like, a new entrant to the space in order to consider doing business with you, and, in that kinda classic adoption curve, there's, like, a big chunk of the industry that's just, like, gonna be, mid to late stage adopters of a technology. And so, you know, coming on like being a part of, a company that's been around for 30 years, like all of a sudden when you're, then kind of selling into that install base, right? Like you come with that institutional credibility that's been there. And it's like a really important ingredient for, a portion of the market. That's no different. I think that's a universal truth, but, like, I'd never experienced that, and so, like, I think that's been, like, a really cool thing to see just, like, the scale achieved. And then, the kind of the surprise to the downside actually kinda has a little bit of a positive too, is, like, big companies and little companies have different cultures, right? So, like, you can have all the strategic rationale for, a product fit or how 1 and 1 is gonna make 3. You join forces and kinda connect things, integrate things, and, like, that's all product and technical related. But, like, culturally, all companies are different. And so, a huge company, a little company, there's, like, by it's just quite obvious, like, there's gonna be major cultural differences, and, like, not every teammate is gonna be, like, adaptable into both of those environments, right? And so, just, like, the natural parting ways of people that, pursue different opportunities because they're not, you know they don't feel like a big company is, like, the environment for them to be most successful. They recognize that, totally applaud and admire that. They move on. A lot of those people are doing really, really cool things now in our space, starting new companies. It's awesome to see. Um, that's a downside because you lose people that you worked with successfully for a really long time. Um, but on the other end, then you're, like, surprised when you see people taking on, like, these incredible roles in a big company, and you're like, "Wow," like, I don't wanna say I didn't expect, but it's like sometimes you're just really genuinely happy and surprised to see someone thriving in a culture that, like, maybe we weren't even able to provide for them as a small company, and they're doing better in a big co-environment. So, I'd say those 2 things are kind of like the most emotionally interesting to me in kind of like the good and the bad type of thing.
I want to ask one more question.
Yeah,
We started this podcast talking about financial insecurity,
yeah.
and how it was kind of a driver for you initially, coming 2 years out of your exit, gaining some financial security. What surprises you on that? Either the upside of gaining financial security, the downside of gaining financial security, and in this next phase of your life, where do you think your motivations are going to lie?
So I think that if you've like never had financial security and then all of a sudden you get financial security, like for me, you know, I would say it still is like a terrifying kind of feeling in a way because you're like, oh man, I got this thing that I spent 35 years trying to feel what it feels like to have financial security. And like, there's a great quote where it's like the trouble of getting what you want is having got what you wanted, you know? And, like, that can be like it's a totally new emotion. When you work so hard to achieve like a financial security, you all of a sudden get it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, like I don't know what to do with this feeling. And then you're like, man, I really don't want to mess this up, right? So, I think I think one of the more interesting things for me is like I've been very mostly I'd say pretty conservative with the measure of, financial benefit that I I experienced. Which is funny because it's like all I've ever done is like high risk type of ventures. But then, that was like a change for me. I probably didn't expect in myself. Um, but I think, again, it's like imagine partying in a techno basement, a basement techno party for like 2 decades. Then you step out into a jazz bar and everything feels all like weird and you have to acclimate. So, you know, um, that's just kind of like maybe a personal experience with that. I think there was a second part to your question, motivation or
Where do
something.
you think your motivations are going to be next?
Um,
Where are you going to find motivation?
yeah, I mean, I think I work with an amazing coach, and like we've had a series of conversations about this very specific thing because that analogy of like her analogy of kind of being in a basement techno party for decades, stepping out into the jazz bar and like feeling like everything's super weird. And like it's kind of a perspective problem because, from the subjective perspective, that does feel super weird and alien, like a different environment for you. Um, but for somebody else, it might be like a perfectly normal type of thing. So for me, like forget kind of the financial side of it, but just like the stress and work and like as as an entrepreneur, anybody listening who's an entrepreneur knows, like there's like a mantle of pressure on you that like I don't think can be replicated if you're not like an entrepreneur or founder. Like I've never experienced anything like that. And so kind of having that mantle of like stress and pressure taken off, and being an employee of a company and finding a way to, add value as an employee but not having that kind of injection of stress all the time. I found that like very, very weird and unnerving. Um, and my coach, she's amazing. And she's like, listen, like, you've proven you can run. Like now you have to prove you can like jog. Or another thing she said is like, you've been drinking from like one bucket to energize yourself. There's many buckets that you can, put straws into to find energy and purpose and meaning and motivation. And a lot of people have like find a good balance of that for themselves. She's like, congratulations, you drank one bucket dry. Um, but that's all you really know. Now you have to learn how to find, motivation from other buckets. And so, we started a family, we bought a house, we're doing a remodel. We've been able to travel a little bit more, reconnect. I volunteer for my church. There's a lot of things, I've been able to do now, pursue some hobbies, things that like I did not have the opportunity to do as like a founder and CEO. You just didn't have the time for it. It's like all focused on one bucket. So now I feel like there's this fun new challenge of being like, okay, like how can I take that next step in adulting where it's like, and I still in my head think I'm 23, so I use words like adulting, even though I've got gray hairs all over the place. But like how now I feel like there's a motivation and a challenge of like, okay, how do I find um, motivation and kind of meaning and purpose from multiple buckets? We'll see how that goes. I don't know. Maybe, that's not how I'm wired, back to the kind of nature nurture thing. And, I just need to like put a straw in one bucket again and whatnot, get after it. But it's been a really fun experience to try to like uh, re normalize into kind of like society in a way. Like I feel like you kind of get it. That's like been the coolest thing is like being able to volunteer more, being able to be present with your wife or family or kids in a way that like there's no way you could ever do as a founder. And it feels so abnormal. But then you realize like, oh, like most people get to do like leave work at 5:30 and like can go to happy hour dinner with their friends. And like, I know you're not doing that, right now. So to be able to like do that and make that feel normal again, it's like, you know, coming back from war, trying to feel normal and, you know, in society when there's not like bombs and grenades going off again. Not to like make fun of people who actually have that experience, but like, yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
Demetri, thank you so much.
Sorry for talking so much.
No, this was, I don't even know. I think we're way over. This might be the longest episode we've done, but
Well,
I
we'll see if listeners, you know, stay to the end.
I think they will. I like already admired you, and I already like respected you, and you already inspired me. And I think this is why I love doing this and like why it means so much to me, because like I can hear from you specifically undistracted and like hear your inner monologue, right? And like it means a lot to me. And I think any founder, any customer, anybody in the industry that knows you or doesn't know you is going to take a lot of value from this. So I really appreciate you sitting down and doing this with me.
Cool, man. Well, I appreciate the invitation to join you here. And after whatever time we've spent, I feel like it's just been you and I, you know, having a conversation like we'd have over a beer or anything else. So it was a cool experience. And I'm really stoked that the journey in multifamily has, you know, created friendships like we've got and everything else. And, you know, that's honestly going to be, you know, the thing that lasts the longest and is the most meaningful. So really appreciate your time too.
Thank you.
Cool.